Our guest Molemo Moiloa is at the forefront of debates on restitution. Her work brings together the worlds of fine arts and anthropology. Her research today focuses on creating practical tools and active and functional methods using knowledge in the creative field, but by also applying arts and, above all, exploring new strategies for bringing art into the community. I met her in Cape Town.
Hello, Molemo Moiloa. Thank you for joining us on Initiative Africa. Could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Molemo Moiloa. I am a Johannesburg-based artist and researcher, and I lead a company called Andani Africa. And we're a research and insights company really engaging with the creative sector across Africa. And one of the projects that we run is called Open Restitution Africa, which is a collaboration with an amazing Nairobi-based organization called African Digital Heritage. And together we do a lot of work around trying to create transparency and access to information as regards African heritage restitution.
So what initially drew you to the intersection of creative practice, but also of community work?
So I come from a kind of familial background of political activism. But I am a creative, I'm an artist, and so bringing those two worlds together has always seemed very normal to me. And the cultural field really is a space for having difficult conversations. It enables new imaginations, and so I think has a lot to contribute to what it means to work in community, to support having challenging, engaging dialogue and looking for solutions in the world.
Tell us about your academic background. So how did it influence your work in arts and community?
Okay, my academic background feels a little bit far away these days. So I come from a fine art and an anthropology background. And my work really brings those two worlds together, thinking about everyday life, thinking about learning from the everyday practices of ordinary people is really important to me. These days, I don't do so much academic research. More of my research is really aimed at trying to create usable tools, active, functional ways of using knowledge in the creative field where we can apply it and really make change.
So as the co-founder of MADEYOULOOK, you explore everyday popular imaginaries and how they produce knowledge. How has this exploration actually shaped your perspective on the role of art in society?
So MADEYOULOOK is an arts collaborative. It's myself and Nari Mokoto. All of my work is very collaborative. And we've been working together for about 15 years now since art school. And our work is very focused on ideas of everyday Black life and learning from everyday Black life in South Africa. And it's really about applying the things that ordinary people do every day and the solutions that people find to other bigger, more complex questions of I suppose, more global social issues such as climate and environment. We do a lot of work, particularly on the land question in South Africa.
What would you say are some of the challenges that you meet every day that you encountered working in arts and community projects in South Africa? And tell us, how did you overcome them?
So in South Africa, actually, a lot of particularly contemporary art practice is quite divorced from everyday kind of community life. It tends to work in quite elite spaces. And so practicing in ways that try to be more community engaged is not quite as well established. But there is actually a very long historical tradition of this kind of work. It just requires sort of unearthing and finding in order to learn more about people who've come before us with these kinds of practices. And I think it's definitely growing and more people are interested in working in this way and kind of exploring new strategies for bringing art into community for more collaborative, more collective engagement.
As a journalist working on the field in Africa, I meet a lot of women who tell me that it's quite tough to be a female creative artist. They feel that they have less opportunities or it's harder for them to showcase their work. Is this something that is true here in South Africa? How do you feel about it?
I think it's definitely more difficult in other parts of the African continent. Art is often seen as a kind of anti-establishment, anti-conservatism sort of field. And particularly for women, I think there's a lot of pressure to remain much more within the status quo. Men are kind of given maybe more space to explore than women are often. It's a little bit different in South Africa. I think there's more acceptance of female artists moving into the art world. And actually, we're currently doing research for the South African government. This is Andani Africa now, which is a 10-year update of a kind of general baseline study of the visual arts in South Africa. And 10 years ago, it found that actually at young ages, there are a lot of artists who are women. But as women get older and older, they tend to leave the field. And the reason for that is a lot of the responsibilities that women take on don't align very well with the way that the visual arts world works. So particularly when women become mothers, doing things like residencies, which require you to work internationally, exhibitions at night, these kinds of things aren't really so conducive to motherhood. And so you find that in South Africa, women enter into the art field. The ceiling is not so low in that sense, but staying in the art field is incredibly difficult for women.
So as head of research of Andani Africa, you focus on open debates around restitution. So maybe can you give us an overview of these debates and the importance of this topic?
So the restitution question is really around the return of African heritage that was taken primarily during the colonial period. 90% of Africa's material heritage is believed to be outside of the African continent, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. And so the restitution conversation has been going on for a very long time to think about what it means for Africans to be able to really connect with their history and their culture, and how difficult that is when so much of it is in other parts of the world. And so this conversation has really ramped up in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. But in that time, even though it's much more visible, in fact, there's much more engagement. There are many more, say, returns of African heritage back to the continent. A lot of that information is still not very easy to access. And particularly what's difficult to access is how to do it. So if you're a family who's lost a loved one who has been, say, a great-great-grandfather or something like this, whose remains may be in Europe because European museums collected human beings. How do you go about getting your loved one back? And there are actually thousands and thousands and thousands of families who want to do this, but it's really difficult to know how to move forward. Many communities who want their material heritage back, instruments, initiation ritual objects, masks, these kinds of things. And again, it's very difficult to know what are the legal frameworks that you can use. Who do you contact? Sometimes people don't even know where they are. And so that information is really what we're focused on, is how to make sure that Africans are able to access that information and then make decisions about how to move forward.
So how do you see the restitution movement in Africa evolving over the next few years? In 2021, we saw what happened in Benin with the artifacts going back home, and some countries like France being quite engaged in the return and restitution process. Are there any specific challenges to overcome to see other nations head the same way?
So I think the big question with restitution that is emerging is, for a very long time, the fight was to try and get particularly Europeans and other people of the global north to agree to return things, to agree that there was a right to have our material heritage back. That has been a kind of hurdle that's been largely overcome. Not entirely, but it's been largely overcome. And so you are seeing returns. What we're now dealing with is a complexity around the nuances of the process of return and how that turns into something closer to restitution. So for me, the difference between return and restitution is that return takes a museum object and then puts it on a plane and sends it somewhere else, ideally home, in inverted commas. Restitution is really about the repair of the breakage that happened in the process of taking that object in the first place, and trying to repair also the knowledges that have been lost since it's been gone. And that means there's a lot of work to happen in Africa. So just because something's being put on a plane doesn't mean that the job is over. In fact, it's just started. And one of the big issues we're seeing at the moment is that a lot of the resources that are going into restitution go into that aeroplane moment. They go into provenance research in European museums. It goes into European staff doing research and other work to return an object. And then maybe, if we're lucky, it goes into the costs of returning an object. But then there's nothing. There's no support. There's no help. And Africans are alone in thinking about, okay, now this is back. How do we repair what has been broken? And the repairing of what has been broken is much more important than the movement of an object. And I think that's going to be the big work for the next couple of years.
What role do you play in the development and implementation of restitution and repair strategies?
So the main thing that the Open Restitution Africa project does is focus African energy on developing knowledge systems for Africans. So one of the core things we do is we've developed a kind of micro grant for African researchers to undertake research around African restitution processes. So understanding African policy frameworks, understanding what are the sort of emerging trends and strategies Africans are undertaking to get their culture and heritage back, and then sharing that information with other Africans. So we're developing an online platform that shares this data and makes it usable to other Africans who want to start similar processes. In addition, a lot of our work is very specifically focused on public awareness and transparency of information. And one of the things that's really important to us is also enabling a younger generation to access this information. So we developed podcasts, an explainer video series. We turn our sort of more formal research into really accessible online content that young people can engage with. And then we also make sure that that gets all around the continent. So, for example, just this week, in collaboration with Raw Material Company, a culture organization based in Dakar, we have a number of screenings of our explainer video series at universities across Dakar to ensure that young people, students, are really engaging with these themes and starting to understand them from an African perspective.
Maybe one last question. You were speaking about young generations, young talents. So what advice would you give to young artists and activists who are looking, who aspire to make an impact, a significant impact in their own communities?
So I think the big challenge with restitution is how to connect across the continent. We have data and connectivity challenges. We often have linguistic challenges, particularly the divide between Anglophone and Francophone parts of the continent. And really connecting across those divides is really important. It's so inspiring to speak to other Africans, to learn from other people's processes. And we have so much to learn from each other. And anybody who is interested in this thematic, I think the number one thing is to connect with other people, grow the community, get involved, and really find out about what other people are doing.